Some games are enhanced when you play them at certain times of the day. It's common to play horror games at night with the lights off. But what about other genres? Why not play a dark and gloomy RPG at night? What better game to fit the bill than the moody PS2 classic that is Digital Devil Saga? It's been a long time since I played this game, so I played for a few hours to reminisce for a bit. Want to sound tired for the full effect here, so not only did I play this game at night, I'm recording this audio at 1 in the morning. Digital Devil Saga is a two-part sci-fi RPG that served as the bridge between Nocturne and Persona 3. It was the intermediary step in making Atlus's RPGs more approachable. If Nocturne was for the hardcore player and Persona for the casual one, Digital Devil Saga occupied this half-hearted middle ground. It introduced a colorful cast to entice a wider audience, but it retained the random battles, lengthy dungeon crawling, and grindy nature that's looked down upon by newcomers to the genre. It's also packaged with a bare-bones battle system that loses most of that luster that Atlus's RPGs were known for. It's a unique pair of games that's absolutely worth your time, but there are some thorns you need to contend with. The US version of Digital Devil Saga replaced the intro theme with a song by a group called Etro Anime. It's from their first album. A couple of Japanese games in the 2000s replaced the opening song for their localized versions. This was before people clamored for accurate localizations and original Japanese dubs. The Tales series did this for most of their releases. Gran Turismo 3 is another. That one was a downgrade. They replaced that awesome Moon Over the Castle theme with Are You Gonna Go My Way by Lenny Kravitz. And people over the age of 30 and live in America know how much this guy was pushed, but I don't think I've ever met anyone that liked Lenny Kravitz's music. But to stay on topic here, the song used in this intro is called Danger, and it predates the game's US release by about 3 years. Tonally, the song feels like it was written for this game with how well it fits. It's a drum and bass track with synths, so think something similar to the Bomberman Hero soundtrack. It turns out that's a great fit for the mood of a dark sci-fi setting. Lyrically, it details the struggle of someone falling into what's potentially a risky relationship and trying to justify taking that leap into danger. Thematically, it feels appropriate enough for the first Digital Devil Saga given the context of its sequel, but I'd still argue it's a more appropriate song for the sequel. Despite not being a fan of this genre of music, this remains one of the most memorable opening tracks to any RPG that I've played across the past 20 years. In fact, the music in general and the visual style, they combine into something that's moody, but not the somber kind. This isn't a sad game. It's got more of a film noir tone. It's got that dark, curious setting where you want to investigate what's going on. You want to solve the case before the sun rises. You know that rainy day movie you watch when it's raining? This is that rainy night game. Playing this at night enhanced that immersive quality. I found myself more absorbed in this world. I stopped to stare at the walls. All of the flavor in this game is rooted in Hinduism. Or maybe it's Buddhism. Maybe it's both. I'm not well versed in either religion, so I can't describe what separates them. But they share common traits. This game deals with the concepts of karma and atma, and your goal is to reach nirvana, which these are all elements of both religions. There are plaques that adorn the walls of this dungeon, and the characters are doing yoga poses. The staircases are peppered with little onion domes. They kind of remind me of the dome at the Taj Mahal. Lots of attention to detail that's easy to gloss over if you're fixated on moving through a dungeon as fast as possible. But when I'm tired, at least, I tend to play a little bit more sluggishly. I slow down to appreciate these things. With the PS2 Atlus games, the big ones people talk about are Persona and Nocturne. I think you guys know how I feel about Persona at this point. The MegaTen fans like to point to Nocturne as one of the greats. I think it's a pretty cool game. That's another one where the setting is a major selling point, and it kinda has to be because the bulk of its narrative is saved for the final act. For the full effect, you've gotta play it on hard mode and die to a random battle because you were back attacked and then lose an hour of progress because you forgot to save. Nowadays it's unheard of, but Nocturne's a game where you can get into random battles while strolling around towns. There's a battle theme specifically for town fights. You'll get to a new town and think, I'm safe here, I think I'll save the game. Then a skull with a snake crawling through its eye socket ambushes you, crits the main character, and that's it. It's game over. Nocturne's also a game where you'll learn the strategy for the bosses after an attempt or two, and they won't be too bad, but then the random enemies will be a constant thorn in your side. They can focus on your main character or get a lucky crit, and this is one of those games where once your main character dies, it's over. so it's completely out of your control, but that's the nature of the game. That's part of the Nocturne experience, and that's why it's so memorable. I can't remember anyone caring about the Raito games at the time, and that's probably why Atlus made big changes when they remade it. It was their chance to salvage a mediocre game that had potential. So the only major series left from this era is the one that the fewest people seem to care about, the Digital Devil Saga duology. The people that have played these games know how good they are, but they're overshadowed by Persona and Nocturne. Persona's more easily approachable. That's what you give to players that want to break into MegaTen. Even though they're not technically MegaTen, they're spin-offs, but close enough. Nocturne's what you play when you're already a fan. Digital Devil Saga occupies this middle ground where it's not as easily digestible as Persona, it's a little weirder, it references Indian religions, which isn't a popular theme you see in video games. It doesn't have that demon catching and fusing system, doesn't have a soundtrack that people gush about a decade later. It's still really good, I prefer it to Persona. I don't know how Persona 3 got away with having one battle theme for 100 hours. But Digital Devil Saga also doesn't instill that same sense of overwhelming dread like in Nocturne. Nocturne, you play that on the true demon ending route, and it genuinely feels like you versus the world. Plus Nocturne's got the fusion system, which does the heavy lifting for most of Atlus's RPGs. Digital Devil Saga is a pair of games that you play for the story and ambiance, not so much the gameplay. The story's got a really cool premise, and it follows through with a satisfying payoff. But the combat's kind of a slog, mostly because the random encounter rate is atrocious. I think it gets worse the farther in you get. I remember getting to the waterways or one of the later dungeons, and I was getting an encounter every 2 seconds, as opposed to 3 seconds in the early dungeons. And I'm a random encounter defender, I like random battles, but in this game, it's absurd. The item that works as a repel isn't even available for a few hours, and by the time it does appear, it's too late. If you can make it to that point, the random encounters already wore away every last ounce of sanity you had left. Maybe you can call that non-stop combat part of Digital Devil Saga's oppressive atmosphere, like you've got to endure this gauntlet to escape this place. The lyrics to the intro theme feel appropriate in that regard. I know the odds are so unfavorable, but you've got to draw the line somewhere. I remember someone comparing the first Drakengard to Schindler's List, saying it's not supposed to be fun on purpose, like the tedium of the gameplay experience is intended to complement the strengths of the narrative, but it's very difficult for me to buy that defense. If I'm not having fun playing a game, why am I playing it? Drakengard's gameplay isn't fun, and that undermines any enjoyment I can squeeze from the story. I don't think anyone's missing out by typing in YouTube Drakengard all cutscenes and just watching that. For Digital Devil Saga, you could also watch all the cutscenes on YouTube, turn it into a movie night, and I don't think you'd be missing much. It's a shame because the setting hooked me right away, and the story is one of the better ones I've seen in a JRPG. Especially considering this is 20 years old, it's still better than most JRPG stories of today. But the unremarkable gameplay wears out its welcome. Especially towards the end, both Digital Devil Sagas throw you into lengthy final dungeons that take up a significant portion of the playtime. And unlike the games with demon summoning, where you've got that gradual accumulation of demons to fuse, and that offers some rich customization, in Digital Devil Saga there's no demon summoning or fusing. You buy skill nodes for each character and equip the skills you unlock. Nocturne used a similar system for the main character's skill progression, but it supplemented the demon summoning aspect. Here, skill progression is very basic, and it doesn't feel as fulfilling for how much fighting you have to do. You'll make it to the final dungeons in these games and go, that seems about right, it's almost over. No, it's not almost over. Digital Devil Saga 1 has a long final dungeon, but I think Part 2, that dungeon accounts for a third of its runtime. Usually I criticize RPGs for being too story heavy, but Digital Devil Saga leans in the opposite direction, where you're chugging through the dungeons to get to the next snippet of story. Catherine also functioned this way. It's not an RPG, but you're pushing and climbing blocks for hours to see the twists and turns of its story. Despite that, replaying this opening chunk was still enjoyable because it's got a nice blend of storytelling and dungeon crawling. The tutorial dungeon has some light puzzle solving to reach a treasure chest, which that was a pleasant surprise. I always like to see games take the shackles off sooner rather than later. I'm one of those players that prefers quick pacing as opposed to a slow burn. In less than an hour, you're introduced to most of the key players, you know what your objective is, the tutorial's out of the way, and you're partway through the first major dungeon, and it's a meaty one with switch puzzles. It's also got a maze-like layout, like every dungeon in this game. and most MegaTen games for that matter. The dungeons here and in Nocturne are proper gauntlets. I can appreciate an involved dungeon, but these games go overboard with the pitfalls and teleporters. I think because I was also tired when I played this, I didn't mind getting lost in a dungeon. I thought I wouldn't have the patience for small annoyances, but it's the opposite. I was so tired that they didn't bother me. Breathing on the controller got me into a random battle, and I thought, oh, alright then. Accidentally went in a giant circle and I just brushed it off. I didn't make it to the more obnoxious stuff. Once you get to the amusement park dungeon, it takes the gloves off, but I could probably manage if I were sufficiently tired. I don't have the energy to get frustrated by every little thing when I'm struggling to keep my eyes open. I like how Digital Devil Saga 1, despite taking place in a strange setting, it doesn't bog you down with lore or backstories or explanations. It saves most of that for the second game. The first one wastes no time in getting you into the action. When you start part 2, you've already got a vested interest in these characters, and that's when the game decides to explain more about them. It waits to earn your attention before hitting you with backstories. It doesn't presume you'll care about everyone right away. Plus that mystique with these characters where you don't know if you can trust your own teammates, but you've gotta press on anyway, that fits the bizarre setting so well. Part 1 is the game where the mysteries are introduced, and part 2 is the payoff. This is really one game split into two, like Golden Sun. You've got to play both. Except I played Golden Sun for the awesome dungeons, and I played Digital Devil Saga for the story. It's been a long time since I last played this. I forgot a lot of the things, and they slowly came back to me as I was playing. But I'll always remember one of the characters. I won't spoil the story because it's worth seeing for yourself, but without spoiling too much, these characters all start out as stoic blank slates, and they gradually develop into distinct personalities. And one of the characters starts out with a monotone, generic American accent, and then he spontaneously becomes Jamaican. It's the most jarring, out-of-left-field thing imaginable, but it stuck with me all these years later. I've always been curious about how Japanese games handle this in their native language. Is it a dialect change? To my ears, all Japanese sounds the same. There's nothing obvious like a Southern or Boston accent for Americans, so maybe it's the word choice. That's one of those lost in translation things that wouldn't really work for a localization. So I think the accent change is a good replacement. Translators get a lot of flack these days for not being faithful, but if there doesn't exist a one-to-one translation, which is frequently the case, what do you do? In my mind, I've always thought that if you absolutely must have 100% accuracy, learn the language. With Digital Devil Saga, I don't know how faithful it is, but the English dub is pretty good. Yeah, I'm one of those guys that listens to dubs because when I grew up, I didn't have a choice. We didn't have dual audio for most Japanese games. And now I can't imagine playing this game without listening to that corny Jamaican accent. It's a vital part of the storyline. There's an interesting contrast between these older Atlus games and their newer output. The director of Metaphor and Persona 5 also worked on the first Digital Devil Saga and Nocturne. And Mach X, which I'm probably one of 4 people on Earth that even remembers that game. He specialized in making oppressive worlds with thick, heavy atmospheres, and he still designs those types of worlds, but now he tries to soften that setting. He segued into bright colors and pop music, and he emphasizes building relationships. I've always wondered if that's one of those things where, as you get older and have kids, that shapes your creative output. The things you value might have changed. Maybe you want to make games that your kids will enjoy. If I had a kid, would I want to play a game where everyone's a cannibal, and they have to eat each other to survive? Sure, why not? It's just a game. But not everyone thinks that way, and I recognize that. The other thing that helped define this older Atlus era was the art. The lead artist was Kazuma Kaneko, and there's an iconic black and white picture of him holding a cigarette. I'll share it on the screen. His art is instantly recognizable, which is something I strongly value with character designers. His characters have thick eyeliner and dark upper lips. That's his trademark style. This stands out, which is what drew me towards these games. Once he shifted away from designing characters, I felt like there was a void left in his place. The artist for Persona and Metaphor likes to use softer, more pastel colors, and I'm not knocking his work. He's got a recognizable style that fits the tone of each game. Plus, these games are distinct from Megami Tensei. Atlus has brighter games with relationship elements for one group of players, and they've got MegaTen for the rest. They can satisfy both crowds. But these were dark games not just thematically, but also visually. If Persona is going to be the bright and peppy series, I'm fine with that. But with Shin Megami Tensei 5 and Soul Hackers 2, it feels like the modern Atlas output is trying to be more like Persona and less like MegaTen. They did a similar thing with Radiant Historia in regards to its art design. I wasn't a fan of the artistic direction of the 3DS ports. The original DS version used black as a high contrast color for the character designs, but the 3DS port used redrawn art that softened everyone's look, made everything bright and cheery, which doesn't really mesh well with the story and music of that game. That's another story that deals with the gradual destruction of the world. A similar case happened with the Shadow of the Colossus remake. Bluepoint undid the washed out look of the PS2 version, which took away from the somber tone. The remake is still a beautiful game, I'm not denying that. On a technical level, it's great, but I don't think it has the feel of the original. That sounds pretentious, I know. I'll never escape the old good, new bad criticism, but there's something about this low resolution era of gaming that I miss. Details were blurry, draw distance was low, environments were geometric, and colors were faded. Developers let hardware limitations dictate the art direction of their games, and when our hardware was weaker, I feel like we saw more creative visions. This is just a generalization, it's not a hard and fast rule, and darker isn't better. Not trying to convince you that my preference is superior. I like plenty of bright games with uplifting music and cheerful stories. Vanillaware is one of my favorite developers, and a big reason why is because I love their art direction. Their commitment to hand-drawn, colorful 2D artwork is a rarity these days. But I also enjoy darker games from developers that try to specialize in things that Vanillaware doesn't want to specialize in. I appreciate a lot of these older games because of their tone, and with remakes, some developers don't seem to value that tonal quality. In a way, I like when hidden gems remain hidden. That makes them somewhat safe. Publishers have their sights set on easy remakes, remaking popular titles and generally ignoring the ones that not many people seem to care about. But when they run out of easy targets, are they going to go for the more obscure stuff? Atlas already remade the first Raito, which was one of their weaker PS2 titles, so is Digital Devil Saga also on their radar? I don't know, but that Raito remake wasn't half bad. Something I find interesting is how frequently hexagons are used in Digital Devil Saga. I'm not a big science fiction guy, but I've come to associate hexagons with sci-fi media. I guess beyond looking cool when you tile them together like a honeycomb, it feels out of the ordinary. Maybe it's different for others, but I can't think of many things I use in my daily life that are hexagonal. If you take a monitor and add 2 more sides, now it's advanced, now it's futuristic. But would our devices function better with more sides? Science fiction seems to incorporate technology that emphasizes appearance just as much as functionality. Take the laser gun, for example. Classic sci-fi trope, but functionally identical to ballistic weaponry. You could argue that there's no ammo expenditure, there'd be less recoil, and countless other small advantages, but let's step back and look at the big picture. What are we using this laser gun for? It's still a weapon, and it's used as one. Across most visual media, laser guns are used in circumstances where ballistic guns would be comparable in performance. Look at Fallout. Are you using laser weapons any different than old school pistols and rifles? They've even got ammo or energy cells in that series. In Mass Effect, laser weaponry generates heat, so you need to pause your firing to let it cool down. Then the sequels introduced disposable heat sinks, shrinking that difference between them and ballistic weapons. Laser weaponry exists because it's cool, and I think that's a good enough reason. Bringing this back around to hexagons, they're here because they look cool. They impart a unique aesthetic to the game that differentiates it from traditional fantasy RPGs. Each of the faction's territories are marked by hexagons on the map. There's also 6 of them so they can orient them in the shape of a hexagon. The little loading icon is a trio of hexagons. When you run into a random encounter, the game overlays a hexagonal grid on the screen and dissolves it from the inside out to reveal the battle scene. This is a really cool effect. I like how the shapes are removed in chunks instead of partially erasing them with a fade effect. The press turn icons are represented as hexagons on the top right of the screen. Even the command bar in the lower left, these are stacked rows of elongated hexagons. There's a subtle honeycomb structure in the background of the menus. On the level up screen you can see this fade in and out behind the character. Here they are in the background of the mantra selection screen. There's also a red digital pulse, and it doesn't quite leave a hexagonal trail, but it almost does. Even the box for the game has them tucked behind the title. I didn't think much of this the last time I played Digital Devil Saga. This might be one of those things where, depending on your mood, you see the world in a different light. So when I'm tired, things that seem irregular or high contrast colors, they stand out more, and everything else kinda turns into a blur. We expect bright colors to signify importance, so we're instinctually drawn towards them. That's why glowing weak points for boss fights became a common trope. That's why yellow paint in modern games has to be yellow. It's easy enough to understand even when you're exhausted or not committing your full attention, or when you're streaming the game and not paying attention, which unfortunately I believe is part of the reason why we've seen such dumbing down of game design. Playing this while tired, I might not be paying attention to combat, but the bright hexagons in the corner and the glowing EKG that signifies my health bar, those give me instant indicators as to what's going on. With a snapshot glance, I can tell if I'm in a comfortable position. The juxtaposition of bright colors and dim backgrounds is another hallmark of sci-fi media, but it's most evident in the cyberpunk genre. The blur of bright neon lights coursing through a grimy cityscape at night, that's iconic imagery in cyberpunk artwork, and it's why when Cyberpunk 2077 footage was shared before the game release, there was a common complaint: why doesn't this game take place entirely at night? The city looks cooler at night, so why not have it look cool all the time? And the answer is because it doesn't fit the story the game wants to tell. CD Projekt could have told a story that takes place entirely at night, but they didn't want to. Likewise, the endless downpour in the world of Digital Devil Saga 1 serves an important story contrast with its sequel. The opening of the first game is dark and wet, while the second game is bright and dry. The city streets are yellow and sandy, almost like a desert. Splitting the game into two makes this contrast more apparent. Not only do I prefer the narrative pacing in Digital Devil Saga 1, I also prefer its rain-smitten world. And I think the existence of Digital Devil Saga 2 allows me to appreciate those qualities more. By measuring the two side by side, it's easier to see what the first game does that I prefer. Kill Bill is another example where, by splitting the movie in two, I can better understand which qualities I prefer when it comes to film. I enjoy Volume 1 considerably more than Volume 2, and that comes down to the premise of Kill Bill. Each person the bride confronts results in a different presentation of the different types of cinema that inspired Tarantino. Volume 1 focuses on an Asian character skilled with a sword. It's an homage to 70s samurai and kung fu action movies. Volume 2 focuses on a character living in a trailer in the middle of the desert. It's influenced by old spaghetti westerns. Volume 1 is fast-paced and action-packed. Volume 2 slows the pace, dials the action back, and focuses more on developing its villains through lengthy bouts of dialogue. One movie isn't better than the other, but by splintering them apart like this, it's easy to tell which qualities a viewer values depending on which movie they prefer. Someone that prefers Volume 1 might prefer action films. Someone that prefers Volume 2 almost certainly enjoys it for its dramatic qualities. Digital Devil Saga's two halves are presented in a similar way. Someone that prefers the first game probably likes the action-packed, snappier pacing. Someone that prefers the second could be drawn to the extended cutscenes and more complex character development. I prefer one over another, but I don't think either is better. Like Kill Bill, these are halves, and the experience is better appreciated when they're paired together. After playing for an hour, I started to remember how goofy this game can be at times. The leader of this faction has a tattoo on her exposed ass cheek. Final Fantasy XIII did something similar with the Lassie branding. Vanille's is on her upper thigh, so she needs to lift her skirt to show it off. I'm not complaining, it's just a curious observation. Her second-in-command resembles Paul Stanley from a Kiss tribute band. Does he paint this star on his face every day? Also in this world, the rain is perpetual, so does he use waterproof paint? Who sells that in this war-torn land? I'm curious as to why this guy has to look this way. The lackeys in this tribe wear mohawks, which makes more sense than the face paint. Every group needs a striking visual identity. Punks are low-threat jobbers, so let's have the first major dungeon be the domain for punks. Thing is, even though these characters look silly, they take themselves seriously. It's an interesting contrast, and considering how much modern media feels compelled to taint serious scenes with humor, this is downright refreshing, at least until the Jamaican guy appears. I keep calling this game dark and moody, but the shadows are very soft, if they're even present at all. Yeah, it's always raining, but even bright indoor environments hold faint shadows. This isn't something I ever thought about when I played PS2 games when they were new, and playing them now, I can truthfully say that I don't think these games would look better with realistic lighting and shadows. They wouldn't look worse, but I don't think the lack of shadows detracts from the mood. Digital Devil Saga used an interesting visual style without the need for advanced lighting. Another one of those concessions made because of hardware limitations. But I think this looks great as is. I'm not concerned with making it look better. While I'm on the subject, there's a remake of Fatal Frame 2 that recently came out, and I never played the original before, so I thought, let me give the original a shot. I've been meaning to for years anyway. I'm not finished yet, but I really enjoy what I've played. Those fixed camera angles are a thing of beauty, and I'm still bummed that the industry moved away from them. After playing for an hour, I watched the first hour of the remake, and the atmosphere is completely different without those fixed angles. I recognize the level design, but the tone is much less frightening because you can see where you're going. You don't know what's around every corner, the rooms don't feel as cramped, and on top of that, you can move with the camera drawn, and now you've got to dodge. In the PS2 version, pulling out the camera locked you in place. No dodging, you had to stow the camera and move. I miss when positioning actually mattered in games, when you need to move out of danger rather than pressing a button to dodge or parry an attack. These little changes amount to a game that doesn't really feel all that scary despite looking more realistic, whereas the original game, with its lower level of detail, managed to produce a thicker, more tense atmosphere. I sometimes question if I'd still prefer and care about these older games if I didn't grow up with them, but playing Fatal Frame 2 for the first time showed me that this stretches beyond a superficial longing for what I played as a kid. I would love to see Koei Tecmo make a brand new horror game that doesn't try to recreate or update the feel of Fatal Frame. Something where they're not shackled by pre-existing elements trying to marry new and old sensibilities. And if Atlas considers remaking more of their older titles, I'd prefer if they use those resources to instead make something brand new. Make a new title that surprises just like Digital Devil Saga did. I'm probably in the minority on that, since I'm sure countless fans are excited for that Persona 4 remake. And I don't want to downplay their preferences in favor of my own. They can enjoy their remakes and I'll enjoy playing whatever interests me. Considering my tastes change by the hour, I can't exactly pin down what I'll be excited to play next. The only thing I can pin down is that I'm exhausted and ready to sleep.